I thought I was a Christian, but my life doesn't look like that person's life. It was comparison in a good way. If I'm gonna be consuming something, I want it to be bringing me closer to Jesus. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Megan, and today I'm going to talk about 10 things I did that brought me closer to God. I did do a video of 10 things I stopped doing that brought me closer to God about a month ago, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. I'll put it up here, but this is going to be 10 things I did. Now, I've been a Christian most of my life. I gave my life to the Lord when I was 19 years old, was baptized when I was 21, but I do not feel like I really drew a lot closer to the Lord and went through a lot of sanctification until I was around 24, 25. One thing that I did that really helped me get a lot closer to Him during that time is I read my Bible for the very first time from cover to cover. I had read my Bible before, and I went to college at Pepperdine, and you have to take an Old Testament and a New Testament class there. So I had read most of the Bible before, but in order to fit the whole Old Testament and New Testament in, they didn't have us read every single chapter. And I remember sometimes like I'd skip through the genealogies, or I'd skim, and I'd be thinking about it more from like an academic standpoint and what I'm going to be quizzed on than just reading the scripture cover to cover for what it was. So this was the first time that I did that. It was a Bible in a year plan, but it honestly took me probably 2 years to get through it. And I think that this was the number one most life-changing thing I did. So much sanctification and change happened during that time, and basically all the other 9 things I'm going to mention I think was because of me reading through the Bible. And I'm actually going back through now, reading through the Bible again, not in order this time, but reading through every single chapter, and I feel like I even like understand it so much more. Like before, it was really just starting to get a basis of knowledge for the books I hadn't been as familiar with. A lot of prophet books I wasn't as familiar with. I didn't really understand like the Psalms. They seemed like the narratives I understood. It was like, okay, this is a story. And the Gospels I understood, I had read those several times, but like a lot of the wisdom scripture or prophet scripture specifically, I just didn't really like understand how that fit in as a whole. And so since doing so much more studying since and going back to reading it, I just feel like I'm constantly learning more things and picking up on new things. And so that was the number one thing I did, was reading cover to cover the entire Bible. Now, the next thing that was a huge game changer, getting plugged into a local church. I know this is probably common sense, but I think a lot of people, specifically young people, can get caught up in church hopping. And so I didn't really go to church consistently growing up. It was here and there sometimes, on holidays definitely, but that was really it. And then when I went to school, I went to church pretty consistently, but our church on campus was Church of Christ, which wasn't the affiliation that I aligned with. And also a lot of my friends, since we were in college, didn't want to go to church all of the time. And so I found myself going to the Church of Christ church most often, just because that's how I was able to get to church most often. But sometimes we would go to a non-denominational church that was more aligned with my faith at the time. So I was kind of hopping around those 2 churches, but also not going every single week. And then after college, we were moving around different areas of LA, and so we would kind of find different churches depending on which area we were living in. But again, we weren't going all of the time. Going to a church, the exact same church, we went to one for a year and a half, I think, and then we moved to Florida, and we church topped for about 6 months, I think, here. And now we've been going to the same one again for a year. And I just think it has made such a difference, not going to different churches every week, not, you know, if I feel like it, I'll go this week. I think honestly, I always wanted to go to church every week, but I didn't always have somebody to go with, and I didn't want to go alone, which I think can be a very common thing. And sometimes I would push myself to go. I even remember trying to volunteer at one, but I didn't really feel like I was invited in. I felt very like left out. So if I didn't know anyone, I just didn't really want to go. Being able to go consistently, I think I was engaged at the time when we started going consistently to that church, or I got engaged very shortly after. And so being able to go with my now husband and our now daughter and just consistently go has been a game changer. And with that has come several other things. I got plugged into a community group at the old church in LA and then also here in Florida. And so being around those same people and building more Christian community. I really just didn't have a strong Christian community And it's so true what they say, if you are who you surround yourself with. I feel like I always had such a heart for Jesus, but I was not surrounded by other people who did have a heart for Jesus. Just being around people who had such a heart for Jesus and an understanding of the scripture, an understanding of God, a relationship with God, that made such a difference in my life. And it was very inspiring, and it was very convicting of like, wow, I thought I was a Christian, but my life doesn't look like that person's life. But it was comparison in a good way. It wasn't like, oh, they're better at this than me and I'm like struggling and whatever. It's not comparison in a bad way. It's like, oh, I like their life. I love how kind they are to everyone. I love how joyful they are. I love how much peace they have. Like all these fruits of the Spirit and evidence of God in their life. I was like, I want to be more like that. And it was like a comparison in a good way that made me more like Jesus. Not because of them, but it made me want to be closer to God, which grew those things naturally. So that would be my second one, is going to church consistently, the same church. And then third, being surrounded by Christian community. And then also number 4, which I kind of threw a bunch of these into the same point, but being plugged into a community group. This is so great for not only Christian community, but also to be able to talk about things as you're going through things, to open up. I definitely get nervous and uncomfortable having to open up around other people, but I think that it's forced me in a good way to try to be more vulnerable and open up in that way, and that's been really good. Even just having prayer from other people, or having people hold you accountable, or people to encourage you, that is such a game changer. Now the 5th thing I did, which is still church related, church is so important, being plugged in person too. It is not the same just watching something online. I also got involved volunteering. I didn't volunteer every single week at our old church. I sometimes was part of the welcome team. My husband volunteered with the youth, so I would attend a lot of the youth events or go to their youth groups and watch my husband preach during those and different things like that. They also would have worship nights, and so we loved attending worship nights every other month or something like that. So really just throwing yourself into church. Read the Bible front to cover, throw yourself into church, throw yourself into community, and get involved as much as you can. Now the next thing, I kind of touched on this on things I stopped doing, which was listening to a lot of worldly music, watching a lot of worldly TV shows, podcasts. But with this, it's listening to worship music 24/7. When my intuition is to put on a YouTube video or put on like a country playlist, which I still do those things, but forcing myself to put on Christian music first thing, it's become the thing that I want to listen to. It's the thing that gives me so much peace. It's the thing that now when I have songs stuck in my head, it's words that glorify God and not a random lyric about a boy or whatever it is, because most lyrics are not glorifying to God. But having worship music in your head is glorifying to God. And I touched on this in the last video too, but not just any worship music where it's like, oh, I love how God makes me feel and it's all about you, but words that really glorify God, words that are taken from the scripture, whether they're hymns or a psalm that's now to music or anything like that, because now in the tough moments, that's what you're singing in your head. And this has really helped me as a mom too. When I'm having tough moments, I put in my headphones and I have worship music playing really loud, and it just brings me back down and brings me so much closer to God, because I need his strength in those moments, and I'm reminded of his goodness and his kindness through the lyrics that I'm listening to. So then the next one, which kind of goes along with the music, is I started reading Christian books and listening to Christian podcasts. So I like to go on walks all throughout the day, and before I would listen to like a bunch of different podcasts, some Christian, some not, but now I really only like to listen to Christian podcasts, because if I'm going to be consuming something, I want it to be bringing me closer to Jesus. So when I go on walks now, I'm listening to Christian podcasts, and that's something else that's really helped me grow closer. Also Christian books, like I mentioned earlier, just because I read through the Bible start to finish doesn't mean I understood everything that I read. And now I am fortunate because my husband went to Bible school, and so he has a lot of knowledge and has been able to give me a lot of pointers on books to read, or if I have questions, he's someone that's really good for me to bounce stuff off of. So I've read a lot of books that he's recommended. I also, right now, like I said, I'm going through the Bible again, but something that I'm doing is I'm reading it with commentary. And so I read a chapter and then I go into the commentary and I read what it says about that chapter to dig a lot deeper into the word and understanding it and reading more into history and what's the historical context and even language. I obviously don't know Hebrew or Greek, but my husband did take those courses, and so he's able to tell me what the original meaning of the word is, and just digging a lot more into that has helped me learn and understand so much more, because I think that people can have a tendency, especially in today's day and age, to be like, how can this Bible apply to me? Like, how is this applicable to my life? How can I get something out of it? And it's almost like self-help, or I don't know, sort of like the worship music. Like, it's just all about you. It's not all about you. It's all about God. Maybe not every line's gonna apply to you, but it's gonna help you to understand God better and his provision for your life and for all of humanity, because you're just one person in his whole plan of everything. Not to say that you don't matter and your plan doesn't matter, but there is more to the puzzle than just your story. So that's something else that I've done that's been really helpful. Next is prayer. I've always prayed, but my prayer life has looked very differently throughout the years. Back in like high school, I remember I would pray on my way to school, like, help me to get an A on my test and help me to play well in my soccer game. But that honestly was a lot of what my prayer life looked like throughout college. But I feel like I really challenged myself at our old church in LA. They were doing a prayer and fasting the first month that we lived in LA. And so I remember taking part of this, and part of the prayer challenge was to pray for like 30 minutes. And at first I was like, what am I going to talk about for 30 minutes? And so I was like, I'm going to start small, and I set my timer for 5 minutes, because that was like a big deal for me. And I talked for 5 minutes, and I did that for, I don't remember, a week or two maybe. And then I increased it to 10 minutes, and I worked my way up to 30 minutes. And by the time I was at 30 minutes, it was like, oh, I need more time. I was in the middle of still talking to God. Like, I just had so much to say, and my prayer life transformed so much through doing that. And now I don't necessarily set timers and pray for an allotted amount of time, but I'm just constantly in prayer. Like, I'm just constantly going to Jesus, talking about whatever. And it's not just like a request, because you don't want to treat God like a genie and just be like, give me this, this, and this. But, you know, it's thanking him, it's gratitude, it's praising him for all of his goodness and his son's sacrifice for us and the gospel and our salvation and all of those things, while still seeking him in hardships and things that we need help with. And so that's been something that has transformed and brought me a lot closer to God. And then lastly, it's just talking about God a lot more. It used to be such a thing I just didn't talk about. You know, maybe I'd say like, yeah, I go to church, depending on who I was talking to, because I did work in entertainment and was surrounded by a lot of non-Christians. So I didn't always talk about it openly, but now it's something that I can't help but talk about. And I do think about it sometimes when I'm talking to non-Christians, or know that maybe it won't settle well with them, or I do try to have discernment with it, and I pray a lot about how to talk about him with non-Christians. But at the same time, I'm always thinking about him, and he's just such a part of everything that it's hard not to talk about him. And then the people who aren't saved, I'm so thinking about like the things they're struggling with. If they only knew Jesus, these things would just, not that they necessarily go away, but they just would have such a different perspective and would be so wrapped up in these things of the world that I can't help but share that with that person. So those are 10 things that I've done to draw closer to God. Again, if you haven't seen my other video of 10 things I stopped doing to grow closer to God, definitely check that out. If you guys want to see more videos like this, let me know. Or if you want a part 2 and I can list another 10 things that I did of how I grew closer, let me know. But in the comments, I would love to hear any prayer requests that you have. I'd love to hear more about your guys' testimonies, any encouragement you need, or anything like that. I would love for it to be a really great community of people able to help and pray for one another. So definitely leave comments of any of those things. And if you like this, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.